Happy New Year, people. We are back here at Exotic Car Hacks, and instead of doing all these new car reviews and stuff, because we haven't had any new cars to review recently, I mean, you've seen we acquired the latest, the 918 and the AMG GT Black Series again. And so this time what I've decided to do so that we start the year correctly is I've decided that the next few videos should be kind of updates on each car that I currently own, why I'm keeping or selling them, and specifically what I've learned after driving them for a little bit. Now you hear that noise? That is the fan of the SF90, and every day this crap just turns on, cools the car, does whatever it does, and then it goes away. So I've learned a few things about this car that I want to talk about, and it's actually funny this turned on because there's a few quirks to this, because you may know that I hate Ferraris. I think they're some of the worst manufactured, quality controlled pieces of crap on the planet. And in addition to that, I will say that typically most Ferraris that are not special, meaning like Speciale, Stradale, or any type of like Pista, and if you look at the basics like F8, 488, 458, the craftsmanship after the 458 has basically been like near dead, right? So I wanted to point out a few things because I've now driven the SF90 for over 1,000 miles for just this specific Fiorino car, and then previous to this, I've had two other SF90 coupes and one Spider that is still around. So we're going to unveil a Spider this year too. But for now, let's talk about this coupe, because I don't know if you remember, the SF90 was the first car that got me excited from Ferrari for quite some time. I think the 296 is one of the ugliest Ferraris they've ever made, so I can only see this going downhill, but I was really excited to hear they're making a hardcore version of that, which is pretty cool to know there's a race version of an SF90 race car. Makes sense. They didn't do the F8 race car, but they did the SF90 race car. Okay, but anyways, so let's get to talk a little bit about these quirks, because there are things that you may or may not know about this car, especially if you think of owning one, that I think would make sense, especially after I've driven it for so long now. So I was a big fan of a couple of things. I've said multiple times that the race seats are an absolute must. I've said they're beautiful and they're very comfortable in. But you know, something that, because this is my first car with race seats, and then the two previous coupes I had the comfort seats. So the comfort seats were flimsy, ugly, and just didn't give the vibe of a real race car, an exciting car. And so the first thing I want to point out is that the race seats are still beautiful after 1,000 miles, but they are so annoying to get in and out of. And I can't stress it enough. They're just so annoying because of how low the car is and how you always kind of bang yourself on this side, and it's really hard. So it doesn't have padding around the edges. And listen, I'm not that fat. Well, I know it's out there, but not that much yet. And I'm not that tall. And this is definitely not easy to get in and out of. But I think one of the things that makes this car so incredibly uncomfortable to interact with getting in and out of is, I want to point this out getting in, is that right here, you kind of like fall in and then knock yourself here, which is okay. But this door, I pointed this out in the first one, is very wiggly, you see? Like, it's not a sturdy door. Like, it's a strong, like it's a hard door. It's a heavy door. But because of that, it kind of constantly has this back and forth motion thing going. So if you actually see how big that is once the door is actually fully open, and you see it has this play in it, for that reason, if most cases, because you park next to people, this is as much as you can open the door. So the door is basically never, ever in a perfect position. It's always in this wiggly half position here. So if you're trying to get out, because it's almost impossible to get out like this, especially with a seat that knocks you here, you almost get into this position where you have to kind of hold the door like this, and then you see, like, get out. And what happens is this door keeps coming back and nailing your knee, which is the worst thing ever. I'm telling you, this is the worst entry-exit out of an exotic in a really long time. And I know it sounds like so petty, like, oh, tell us about your first world problems, but this is a real problem if you own this car, like a real problem, especially if the door is carbon and it keeps nailing you in the knee. The other thing that's absolutely, completely crap on every level is this steering wheel. I have given the steering wheel a chance so many times for so many different reasons. I've said, hey, it's all digital. Hey, it's new. They're going to figure it out. The touch is so crappy Like it just takes so long when you're trying to get something in the dash done that you don't know if you're pressing it right. Are you pressing it too hard? It does something different. It is just the worst steering wheel in terms of new modern steering wheels in Ferrari. And I think the only fix to that was just either make it more responsive or just don't put a digital steering wheel. It's absolutely, completely crap. So that's that. The other thing you'll have to live with this car, which is something that, again, you come to live and learn, this is a Fiorina packaged car. So the Fiorina packaged car, has the extended Fiorina. This was a very high $700,000 MSRP from the factory, which means that you have not only all this carbon, you have this carbon spoiler, you also have titanium exhaust and titanium springs, which means you'd get the lift delete. Now, it's not that you can't afford the lift, it's that you can't get the lift because of the type of suspension that is on here. And in addition to that, you get these carbon fiber wheels. Now, because of this suspension specifically, it is incredibly adjustable and can come all the way to the floor, so you'll never need to buy springs or anything. Don't make that mistake like I did, only to realize you can't install them. And then you'll realize that you can get that perfect stance, just like I did here, slightly lowering it so it doesn't sit like a bus, adding a set of Novitec spacers, and getting that beautiful thing. In addition to that, you may want to know if you do spacers, Novitec will recommend a 10-15 spacer when you should really be putting 20s all around to get that perfect flush look, even if you're not slamming the car. So they're wrong on that, and I've used the 812 GTS spacers to basically get this car exactly where it needs to be. And it looks absolutely phenomenal. So I just wanted to point that out. But it is something else you have to live with, which is this wonderful and very, very annoying two-segment down here. The first one is that every time it rains, this wonderfully open engine, which is something we've seen on Ferrari, will get completely soaked and it will take an hour to clean. So that's problem one. Problem two right here is that this diffuser is very, very low, and the car is not even slammed. So it is prone to hitting just about every single thing if you back into it. So you have to be super careful, and the camera is awful. So the camera doesn't really give you depth. So it's very hard to really see like when you're about to nail this or not. So this is a high risk piece, it's a very expensive piece, and it's now exposed to a lot of damage if you're not careful, especially when it's that low. So that's problem one. But then in addition to that, when you tow the car, because it doesn't have a lift, and you put it even with race ramps and flatbeds, you still run into this issue where the back is like literally 1 millimeter from scraping the floor, even with wood board. So very inconvenient, because even the dealership towing this for free service back and forth will still get it wrong and somehow create a problem. Now, the last thing I'll leave you with, because this happened on previous cars, not this one. So these cars have these super cool batteries, obviously, that you're familiar with, which, you know, are hybrid batteries. But one thing you may not know is that these cars have an actual manual override in case you get locked out because your battery is drained. So there's a lot of misconception, and I learned this recently, so I'll share it with you, that these hybrid cars cannot stay plugged in all the time. Like the 918, the P1, the LaFerrari, you can't just leave it on a tender because the bigger hybrid battery thing will basically drain out or destroy the lithium battery, and it's very expensive. It could be like almost 100 grand on some cars, and this car, I think it's like 20, 30 grand. But the point I'm trying to make is usually you're not supposed to leave these cars plugged in, and so that's one of the reasons why most people leave them in their garage and then they forget, and 2 weeks later they're dead. So you usually have these keys, which are really innovative keys, and we talked about this in the first review. You can check it out. It'll be in the link in the bio, in the description. But the main thing is you have these metal keys that basically open the car in case you get locked out. The issue with that, though, is if you get locked out because of a dead battery, typically your gauge here for refueling with the actual, you know, like hybrid, whatever, power charger is also electronic, so that won't open. So, like, what's the point of opening the door if you can't open the hatch to charge it? Well, yes, that's a flaw in design. On the 918, at least, when you open the door, it automatically unlocks the hybrid side of things. So at least it's now manual instead of waiting for a button, which was really, really cool. And I thought clever of Porsche and not so clever of Ferrari. So has the design aged well a year later? Spectacularly. Still one of the prettiest Ferraris on the road. But just going back to this for a second, what I've learned now is that you can actually leave this car plugged in into the hybrid charger, and it will regulate itself literally to know when it's charging and when it just sits without charging anything. This is a very interesting concept that I learned at Ferrari from our friends at Ferrari at Palm Beach. where they just told me you can just leave it plugged so you don't have to worry about it all the time. Is it charged? Is it not? Is it good? And I thought that was something cool and something different that I didn't really see because previously I was like, oh, I'm not going to leave it somewhere where it's under a lift or something because I may forget to drive it and then it will just die. Now, that said, the performance has aged well. It's still one of the fastest cars on the road. This has been incredibly good in craftsmanship. My last two were average. The Fiorina Special Rosso Mugello, like fully decked out car, has been a good version of the car. I think it's because it's not a first year car, it's a 22, and it's very well equipped. So I think that helped. The fact that when you spec cars, they take more time and more order. But I want to show you an example of craftsmanship that I discussed with Ferrari because this car is brand new. I want you to see this because I want you to understand why I get frustrated with these things. If you take a look here at the craftsmanship between this piece right here, which is the Alcantara, and how it comes over the carbon, you'll notice that it's not even in. You see, it needs to be in, like if I'm pushing it in. It's basically built wrong. So a lot of cars like this, like a lot of Ferraris, basically, this is a very minimal issue. But a lot of Ferraris have issues like this, or basically between the black and the glass, you'll see the glue coming off, so you'll have an issue there. You'll have little things like the spoilers aren't lining up correctly, so like you'll have gaps here. So you have these little issues. This car, I've been very fortunate, has not been as prone to these issues, but still, nonetheless, a very interesting car, and I think a fantastic Ferrari altogether. So where do I think values are going? We've seen values soften, like I called it. About 7 months ago, I said there would be a dip where SF90s are valued because there's more units. We've seen non-Fiorina cars get traded near MSRP or a little bit over that. And we've seen full Fiorina package cars, again, depending on how hot the spec is, trade either at or above MSRP, somewhere around 50 to 100K over. So do I think that'll continue? I don't think the SF90 will sustain a very high over MSRP leverage point for a very long time. I think very special colored Ferraris and special editions will always do well historically, but not in the short term. So you have to be careful if buying one of these for value standpoint, you're going to be in it for a long-term ride. It is, I will tell you, the best Ferrari I've driven in a very long time. I'm much more a fan of this than the Pista. I'm not a fan of the turbo kind of feeling. I like the hybrid, no lag feeling. It gives you a naturally aspirated feeling while still giving you the power of turbos in that regard. So I really like this. I think this is a really, really good car altogether, despite the fact that the majority of these aren't built that well. So if you've considered buying one, this is still a good time to kind of pick up one. Just keep your eyes, don't be in a rush. Make sure you get the full Fiorina package, which are the carbon wheels, carbon spoiler, titanium exhaust, and titanium springs. That will make a significant driving difference. The other argument I would make is if you get the black roof, make sure they also got this particular piece in gloss black. It looks terrible when it's in matte. It just looks awful. You'd have to cover it in PPF or something. This car is equipped with all the carbon options, the special interior carbon, even two-tone from the matte carbon to the gloss carbon to the doors in carbon, carbon tunnel, carbon everything. I mean, there's very few options that aren't on this car, and the paint is the historic contemporary Rosso Mugello paint, which is that dark red and non-metallic. Like, it's just fantastic looking. That's why I went with this color, and this car really hits for the lines of this car specifically. Like, this color really works. If you have been wanting to know more about the SF90, I just broke it down for you just enough to know exactly what to do with this car. Now remember, click like, turn on subscriptions, and of course, well, did I just say turn on subscriptions? I think I'm saying click like. How does it go, Reggie? Which one is it? Is it I forget because I don't really give a shit for YouTube. So it's like, turn on notifications, right? And then subscribe. Yeah, there you go. And then leave a comment and tell me if you have any questions about the SF90 that I can answer, especially if you're thinking of buying one. And more importantly, make sure you click the link in the actual description where you're gonna learn how to get in and out of exotic cars like this without losing in money. And in many cases, actually making money. Last year alone, I made over $600,000 just driving my personal exotic cars. And we're gonna do a video on that too in the upcoming week. But for now, look at it, absolutely beautiful. Click the link, learn how to get in cars like that, take the free training, join Exotic Car Hacks, whatever you do, and I'll see you in the next video. Happy 23.